I'm starting another video. I'm going gangbusters again. We're doing on a new series here that I'm calling The Impossible Mathematics of Atheistic Materialism and Evolution. And in this one, we're going to talk about the probability problem of atheism. Okay? So, without further ado, let's watch the first clip. And we'll see that, and we'll talk about what I'll call the atheist creation story from their God nothing and how improbable it is. It's beyond belief, really.
Recently, but we used to do this as kids. Alphabet soup. You start looking for, kids are looking for words, right? Or they try to spell their name or something in alphabet soup. And if you just pour this randomly at random, there's going to be words, and we're perfectly happy to attribute those to coincidence, right? So three-letter word, there'll be short words. They're messy. It's C. It's a short word, but it's kind of a messy version of C. So you're not at all spooked by seeing that. It's not like, oh my goodness, a message from God. C in my alphabet soup. May, again, it's messy. The A's upside down, short words. There's a four-letter word, but it's even more messy, right? Rose, you have to kind of curve it around. Coincidence. We're very happy to attribute these to coincidence. When I gave this talk, someone pointed out holy. Do you see holy under C there? H-O-L-Y. Now that is no coincidence. No, that is a coincidence. But if you were to lift the lid on a pot of alphabet soup and see this, you would know that is not a coincidence, okay? So, and a 4-year-old would know this. So what I want to ask here is, we all get this. Is it possible to actually show, could you bring a team of scientists in here and say, yeah, you know, not only do we all know this, but we can prove that the 4-year-old's right. That can't happen by coincidence. Is there a way to do that? And there is. You use the math of probability. There's a very simple sort of analysis you do. So for this, I would put a grid of squares over the picture, and the grid squares are about the size of the letters in this alphabet soup, and there's 23 grid squares, and there's something somewhat special about all 23 squares. In 5 of them, you have the 5 letters that spell pasta. In the other, 18, you have these relatively cleared zones that make the pasta letters, the pasta word pop, right? They pop because there's a clearing, and then you get the 5 letters in there. So there's something special going on in all 23 of these squares. And we could just, with a rough calculation, ask ourselves, how special is what's happening in those 23 squares relative to the rest of the alphabet soup surface? And it turns out, if we say those 18 squares that are cleared are like 1 in 10 unusual, and all we're saying there is you'd have to look at quite a big region of this random soup to find a cleared spot, at least 1 in 10, but we'll just use 1 in 10. And the 5 that have the letters that spell pasta are like 1 in 100 unusual, because they have not only a letter in them, but the letter is oriented the correct way. It's not upside down, it's right way up. And the letters spell a word, so it's somewhat special. We'll call it 1 in 100 special. If that's true, if these numbers are, and they don't have to be exactly right, the whole pattern is 1 in 10 to the 18th, and that's for the 1 in 10 special for the 18 cleared squares, times 100 to the 5th unusual. The 1 in 100 is for the letter squares. And if you multiply that out, it's 1 in 10 octillion unusual. So this simple calculation, and a scientist would say, yeah, that's about right. You would need to pour 10 octillion bowls of alphabet soup in order for something like that to come out just by coincidence. And you will never, God help us, you will never pour 10 octillion bowls of alphabet. If all the oceans were alphabet soup, it would not give you 10 octillion bowls of alphabet soup.
So in the video, 10 octillion bowls of alphabet soup, more alphabet soup than all the oceans in the world. So just the word pasta, in a small clearing, by chance, is unbelievably, astronomically unlikely on this planet, by chance. If all the oceans of the world were nothing but alphabet soup, yet in this video, you'll see that the atheist is going to have you believe a fairy tale. And in fact, they're desperate for you to believe this fairy tale. And I hate to say this, you'll see in a minute, probabilistically, it's getting astronomically worse for them. Here's their just so story. In fact, they copied it again. They did it twice. They wrote this down twice. So here's their story, though. And we were talking about the RNA molecule, but I keep pointing out to them, you can't just talk about an RNA molecule. You need the rest of the cell on top of the molecule. And you need, which they never address, the RNA molecule. Not only do you need the RNA molecule, but you need an RNA molecule that's pre-programmed so that it'll replicate the next cell. And they never talk about that. They never tell you where that kind of information came from. They just assumed it would magically show up. But anyway, it still doesn't matter, because here what they give me is it would likely be trillions of the things. In other words, in this pond, in this highly rich, chemically active pond of stuff, you would need trillions. No, wait a minute. It's likely way more than that. So trillions upon trillions of pieces of this cell, and then over thousands and millions of years, they talk about how individual bits had their own separate existence. It was built. The cell was somehow by chance in a pond where they had wet and dry cycles. It was building a little piece here and building a little piece there, and it would replicate itself, etc. They swear up and down RNA can replicate itself. Never tell you how much, though. I mean, there's a limit. There's a limit to the replication that they've been able to do in the lab, but they won't give you a number. When in fact, again, the amount of information that they need is in the millions, at least millions, if not hundreds of millions of lines of code in this supposedly self-replicating, self-making RNA molecule. But who cares? Who cares? If you've got, we're not talking about just pasta with 5 spaces now. We're talking about trillions and trillions of pieces. Trillions and trillions of pieces. And then they, where to get this term, pseudo-evolved. I want to say, again, pseudoscience? What are you talking about? Okay. Anyway, they swear up and down that they've got the RNA molecule, that it can form entirely naturally, etc. But again, RNA is not the deal that's the problem. Again, just getting a molecule is not life. You have to have it programmed, and it has to know how to program itself somehow so that it can replicate itself. And again, the amount of information needed, the sets of instructions and programs is needed, is beyond your comprehension and mind. You can't do it in a garage. You guys make it sound like this could be done in a garage. Well, it can't be. So what's the difference between the alphabet soup example and the atheist creation story of Who's Your Daddy, I call it? Well, it's worse. For the atheist, is the pasta story is just one like this. If you go down to the beach, okay, let's do away with pasta. Let's go. You go down to the beach and it says, Mary loves John on the beach. Or I've heard alphabet cereal. You walk downstairs and the alphabet cereal spilled over and it says, take out the garbage, mom. Right? What's the chances of that happening? Again, you see, take out the garbage, mom, with a little clearing around it. That's even more letters, but just a few more letters than what you had before. That increases that probability beyond the octillion. You guys are crazy if you think that happens by chance. And we're just talking about the word pasta, for God's sake. All right. It'd never be produced in all the oceans of the world. So how could abiogenesis ever occur? If it itself requires not just PASTA, but now it requires trillions upon trillions. And now I've added trillions upon trillions because they said it. I had it at trillions. In other words, my mantra has been a little cell is it's a trillion times more complicated, just a trillion, by the way, just a trillion times more complicated than the space shuttle. Well, now they're telling us it's trillions upon trillions. So I'm telling you, someone needs a course in the second law of thermodynamics, and I have 2 good videos on it, especially the first one I have here. I'll have them in the links in the description below, but the physicist Brian Cox talks about a sandcastle versus a sand pile. It's the exact same example. It's just talking about sand versus trillions of pieces for a cell. If Mother Nature cannot make a sand castle, it cannot build a cell. I'm telling you, somebody also needs a course in probability math. The professors have the students convinced that they need trillions and trillions and trillions of this stuff. The problem is when you add more things, you're adding more complexity, not less. You're making it less likely than more likely. So let's look at another example here.
If you were sitting with someone who had a red piece of paper and they crumpled it up and threw it on the table and it looked like this, you could say, or I could say, that reminds me of the head of an elephant. Do you see the trunk, the big head, the ears? But it's not spooky, right? You would think, oh my goodness, how did you make the head of an elephant by crumpling up red paper? Because you have to sort of impose the head of an elephant on that, right? It's not compelling. You can see it when I point it out, but it's not really that remarkable, is it? Whereas if you see this red piece of paper on a table, you know somebody has done something to that piece of paper. If a 4-year-old who had never experienced origami, had never done anything with origami, never seen an origami crane before, came into a room, there's no one in the room, and they see that on the table, they know, he or she knows that someone did that, right? Someone made that, and they also think, I want to know how to do that, right? That's the way kids think. And that's what I think is going on from the age of 1 in humans. We have an uncanny ability to recognize the things that required know-how in order to do. And we recognize them because we're in the business of wanting to know how, right? So we see the things that are clever. Sister, brother, mom, dad did that. I want to do that. That's how we're wired automatically. From the cradle, we are thinking that way. And so we automatically spot the things that require cleverness to do because we're clever and we want to do them.
If Mother Nature can't paint a cave painting that a 4-year-old could paint, or can't spell the word pasta, or I love Mary on the beach, or Mary loves John on the beach, or take out the garbage mom from alphabet cereal on the counter, you're talking about something that's, again, mathematically, it's so far above those 3 examples that you're talking about. The atheist, the new, and I call it the new abiogenesis story. It's the new abiogenesis story, and it's a fairy tale for grown-ups. The real question that I have to ask is, why are they moving the goalposts? And when I say moving the goalposts, it's kind of interesting because I was discussing this with my daughter, and I asked her, I said, now, when you were in school, what do you remember as, quote, minimum life? Or when life started, when evolution got going, what was the lowest thing she could remember? And it was a cell, a one-celled creature. That's what we talked about. That's what I was taught. But now they're moving the goalposts. You have to ask yourself why. Because the evolutionist must. And one word, complexity. The cell is now, it's a trillion times, according to the new abiogenesis story, more complex than the space shuttle. And here's a side note. When I did the very first video, I showed a clip of Lee Cronin, and the clip in there with him showing the list is from a lecture he did in 2012, and it was based on a paper of his from 2007. So I went out to the internet and I updated the list, and it's nowhere near, there's no difference, and this is in January 21st of 2022. So I updated the list. They kept saying, well, that's an old list. That's an old list. Okay, I updated the list. Anyway, beside the point. So now let's add some more complexity to the problem that the atheist already is going to face.
This is a monster protein RNA complex called the ribosome. This is the molecular machine that builds proteins by reading the genetic instruction on an RNA. And you don't need to worry about all these terms, just look at it, okay? That's more sophisticated than an origami crane. So this is the level that I have been looking at life for many years now, looking at individual protein molecules and asking whether they themselves are too remarkable to be coincidences. Because you have to arrange this machine is reading along an RNA that came off of a DNA gene, and that has sequence instructions, and this is the machine that is reading those instructions and putting amino acids to play, connecting them to form a long chain of amino acids that is sequenced according to the genetic sequence on the gene in order for this long chain to fold up and form one of these, a single protein molecule with these really elegant three-dimensional forms. There's thousands of these forms that have been cataloged now. I'm just showing you a few so you can get an idea of how sort of visually attractive they are, but also how varied they are. They come in all kinds of different shapes, and those shapes are critical for what they do.
Looking at that machine, and it's a factory in the little cell. What came first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, the factory itself is built of proteins, yet it manufactures proteins. So you have a molecular factory that somehow knows how to run itself, and it builds proteins, and it's built of proteins. Can anyone fathom at the cellular level how this factory was built? How could a natural process build an entire factory before you had the first cell that is made of proteins? And the factory itself is made of proteins. It actually makes proteins. And again, we'll get into more depth in proteins in one of the future videos, so I'm going to stop there. But I just wanted you to get like he did. Look at that. Look at that factory. That's a factory. So how many cells have ribosomes? Because protein synthesis is an essential function of all cells. Ribosomes are found in practically every type of multicellular organisms, as well as in prokaryotes and eukaryotes. In fact, eukaryotes cells specialize in producing proteins that have particularly large numbers of ribosomes. So everything has a ribosome machine factory in it to build other proteins. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Now, to make matters worse, since we're on the subject, let's talk about other molecular machines. And here's a quote. To get the idea of the size of these protein machines, each one is made of about 6,000 atoms, which is very large by molecular standards. There are about 1 million. Excuse me? There are about 1 million of these large pieces of apparatus in a cell, and there are more than 2,000 different types of them. Wow! 1 million nano, micro, molecular machines, however you want to put it, and 2,000 different types of them, and they're specialized to do particular operations in the chemical factory. Wow. Now it might just start to dawn on you why the goalposts are being moved by the evolutionists. They're forced to. They have to move the goalposts. I mean, these chemical factories called ribosomes build proteins, yet there are over 1 million molecular machines and 200 different types of machines. And I know that's a typical of a modern day cell. I agree. But the first cell had to have some of them. You can't just lop it off and say, oh, no, it didn't. That adds to the complication of abiogenesis. And we haven't gotten into homeostasis, and I'm not going to get into it yet. But that's what some of these molecular machines are used for. Now, here's an interesting tidbit. How many molecular machines do you have at the tip of your finger? Watch this.
Protein molecules are a class of chemicals in your body that do everything that run your system, your body, and other living systems. They make you walk and talk and think. They run your immune system. They run your brain. They run your heart. They digest your food for you. Now, on the other hand, having said this, let me say also that protein molecules among molecules are very large and big and complicated, and this is a picture of one. This is a picture of a relatively small protein molecule. And the case I want to make for you is that proteins are machines. You have 20,000 odd different types of machines in your body, and then other kinds of living organisms have other kinds of protein machines. There's tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of different machines. And the first case I want to make for you is that these are real machines. That's not a metaphor. They use energy, they spin around, they pump, they act to cause force and motion. This is just a side view, a static view of a thing that is a protein motor. That light gray at the top is your cell membrane. Above it is the outside of the cell, below it is the inside of the cell. And this is just showing you a static picture, and now what I'm going to do is to show you a dynamical movie of how this machine actually works. This is a picture of that, this is a movie of that machine, and what you can see is it pumps acids, those are the little cubical things, in and out of your cell so that it keeps the pH balance in your cell. And the things down at the bottom, the little cards going in and out, that's where the energy comes and goes. And what you can see is a ribbon diagram. So that shows you the nature of the protein molecule. And a critical point that I want to make about that movie and about how proteins function in general is they function by shape and by shape changes. And you could see that protein molecule going back and forth as different chemicals come and go. Shape is the critical thing here. I've just shown you a few examples of tens of thousands of protein machines, but the case I want to make for you is just to convince you they are real machines, just at the super microscopic level. There's a 500 billion big world machines out there in the world right now. You have more machines in the tip of your little finger than there are total big world machines out there. There's huge prospects for scaling these up, for solving problems having to do with water supply, health, energy, solar energy conversion, human transportation, information. We see it on the micro scale. We should be able to make it work on the macro scale. It's one of the rare cases in history where you can already see how a technology works in great detail before you've even developed it. We see it work on the small scale. It's just a matter of can we scale it up. We just need to learn the principles. We just need to figure out how to harness it, and conceivably it's a future you will see and we will all see if that happens. Thanks for listening.
That video contains so much information. It's amazing. Scaling up the technology. He talked about a flagellan motor. I cut that part out, but I showed you just one of the. He showed several different protein machines. You got a half a trillion. You got tens of thousands of different machines. You got a half a trillion. You got more molecular machines in the tip of your finger than they have in the whole world. And you're trying to tell me that all came about by chance? Nonsense. Nonsense. Again. We're talking about, now, let's go back to the quote, Abiogenesis atheist story of trillions and trillions of these pieces. And they're just pieces of the cell, mind you. They're not living. And they're magically, somehow they get magically arranged in the cell. Nonsense. It's hogwash. It's exactly like what Brian Cox described as a sandpile versus a sandcastle. In fact, it's way worse than that. Because again, not only do you need the cell, and an RNA molecule. The RNA molecule must be programmed. I never talk about that. It's impossible hogwash, but you can believe it if you want, but it's a fairy tale for grown-ups, and that's a fact. The real question is why? Why have the goalposts moved? How life began from a one-celled creature. Again, the word is complexity. The atheist evolutionist materialist, he's actually backed himself into a corner. Now, in Darwin's day, you could just put on your little thinking cap. You can just imagine at the bottom level, since they had no idea, you could just imagine that life at the lowest level had to be some kind of simple chemicals, some little, what they call protoplasm. Then even when I was in school, and even my daughter apparently, the cell was always thought the lowest form of life. And again, Lee Cronin, that's the list he used. That's the smallest form of life. But today they're changing it. And here's why they're changing it. According to their own words, the cell is now 1 trillion times more complex than the space shuttle. That ain't going to happen by chance processes. So, what does the atheist evolutionist materialist do? He has to redefine what life is now. He has to redefine what evolution is and call it pseudo-evolution. In fact, they kill the second law of thermodynamics, and then with the other breath they say, and that's what they did. They accused me of not understanding the second law. And here's a quote. Go tell a physicist that agency can violate the second law of thermodynamics. Sorry, bud. You're simply wrong about this. Nothing ever measured ever violates the SLT. That's why it's a scientific law and not a suggestion. Nothing in the universe violates the second law of thermodynamics at all, ever, nor can it. Well, then why did they violate it in their Abiogenesis story? They violated it themselves. It's really, in fact, not only is it the same old story, in other words, put your little imagination cap on and believe with them, you know, hey, we have trillions and trillions of these things sloshing around in this chemically active soup, right? It's the same story. The problem is they're adding trillions and trillions of complexity, not less. They're making it worse for themselves mathematically, not easier. It's a monumental infraction of the second law of thermodynamics. So now we come to the crux of the story. This is the crux. We're talking about probability. If Darwin had been correct, and it would have been a simple chemical soup, a little protoplasm, that's how small or how far down we could get life, he would have something, but you don't. In fact, here's the conundrum. We're now talking about trillions and trillions of things, which probabilistically increases the probability that it'll never happen. Having trillions and trillions of options does not fix the problem. You're going in the wrong direction. Probabilistically, you're going in way the wrong direction. Again, if Darwin had been correct in his imagination that it was some simple protoplasm, you would have a point. But you're not, and your story is all wrong. 180 degrees the other way. Your creation story is actually getting more outrageous and fanciful by the minute. And you either don't want to see it or you just can't. And now, here's the best part for me. You accuse me of believing in magic. Well, at least I have a magician. Now, you believe in magic, but without a magic worker. That's a scientific impossibility. And based on your own story, what's more reasonable to believe? Sky Daddy Jesus is, and that's the truth. Enough said. Have a blessed day. Thanks. Bye.